I never thought a simple knock at the door could turn my entire world upside down. But when I opened it and saw my nephew standing there, holding a toolbox and flashing that familiar smile, I had no idea my life was about to change forever. What started as a routine favor quickly spiraled into something I never saw coming, and something I wasn't sure I could resist. I always believed my life was simple, predictable, even. I was 36, recently divorced, and focused on rebuilding my life one day at a time. My home had become my sanctuary, a quiet place where I could escape the chaos of the outside world. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. My nephew, Ryan, had always been like a little brother to me. I watched him grow from a shy, awkward teenager into a confident 23-year-old man. He was the kind of guy people naturally gravitated toward, charming, athletic, and always quick with a joke. After my divorce, he made it a point to check on me, helping around the house whenever I needed it. It was sweet, and honestly, I appreciated having someone to rely on. That Saturday afternoon started off just like any other. The house was quiet, and I decided to tackle my cluttered closet. It was supposed to be a productive day, a chance to clear out old memories and make space for something new. But when I stumbled upon an old dress shoved in the back, something shifted. It was a short, black dress I hadn't worn in years, tight in all the right places. I held it up, smiling at the memories it brought back, nights out, laughter, and feeling unstoppable. On a whim, I decided to try it on. Just for fun, I told myself. The dress fit maybe a little too well. I twirled in front of the mirror, laughing at how ridiculous I felt. And that's when the knock at the door came. I opened it, still half laughing, and froze. Ryan stood there, holding a toolbox, his eyes widening for just a second before he smiled. "Aunt Rachel, you called about the leaky faucet, remember?" My stomach dropped. The dress suddenly felt too tight, too revealing. But I forced a smile, stepping aside to let him in. "Yeah, of course. Thanks for coming." I told myself it was nothing, just a harmless visit. But the way his eyes lingered, just for a moment, made my pulse quicken. And as he walked past me into the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us, and there was no going back. Ryan worked on the sink while I tried to busy myself in the kitchen, pretending everything was normal. But it wasn't. Not even close. I could still feel the heat in my cheeks from the way his eyes had lingered earlier. Like he'd seen something he wasn't supposed to. I told myself I was imagining things. He was family after all. What could possibly be wrong? But as I walked past the bathroom to grab a glass of water, his voice stopped me. "Aunt Rachel, can you give me a hand for a second?" I hesitated. There was something in his tone, steady, but just a little too casual. I stepped into the bathroom, trying to keep my expression neutral. "What's up?" He was crouched under the sink, sleeves rolled up, showing off toned arms that I hadn't noticed before. He motioned to the faucet. "The pipe's stuck. Can you hold this while I try to loosen it?" I knelt beside him, our shoulders nearly touching in the small space. My pulse quickened, and I hated myself for noticing the faint scent of his cologne, fresh and clean, but completely out of place in that cramped bathroom. We worked in silence, but I could feel him watching me. Every time I glanced his way, he quickly turned back to the pipe. My mind raced. Was I overthinking this? Or was there something else happening, something neither of us wanted to admit? Finally, he stood, brushing his hands off and flashing that easy grin. "All done. Should be good as new." I laughed nervously, grateful the moment was over. "Thanks. You're a lifesaver." But just as I turned to leave, he stopped me. "You know, Aunt Rachel, I don't think I've ever seen you wear something like that before." I froze. My cheeks burned as I tugged at the hem of the dress. "Oh, this? I was just cleaning out my closet. Thought I'd try it on before donating it." He didn't respond right away. Instead, his eyes lingered just a second too long before he smiled. "Well, it looks good on you." His voice was softer this time, almost hesitant. My breath caught, and I forced a laugh. "Thanks, I guess." I turned to leave, desperate to escape the sudden weight in the air. But before I could step out of the room, he spoke again. "Aunt Rachel, you ever feel like something's happening for a reason?" I turned, startled. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then shook his head with a nervous laugh. "Never mind. Forget I said anything." But I couldn't forget. Not the way he looked at me, or the tone in his voice. That night, as I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it all. Ryan was family, nothing more. Then my phone buzzed. It was him. "Hey, can I ask you something?" I stared at the message, my heart racing. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I finally typed back. "Sure. What's on your mind?" His reply came almost instantly. I just keep thinking about today. You look different. Surprised me, I guess. My stomach flipped. I typed back quickly, trying to keep things light. I was just trying on old clothes. Nothing serious. His response came after a long pause. You looked really good. I mean it. I froze. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen. Was this just a compliment? Or was it something more? I didn't know how to answer. Or if I even should. But one thing was clear. This wasn't the end of it. The next morning, I tried to shake off the unease lingering from Ryan's messages. It had to be a misunderstanding, a fluke. That's what I told myself as I sipped my coffee, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. But then came the knock at the door. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. No one ever showed up this early, and deep down, I already knew who it was. When I opened the door, there he stood, Ryan. Hands shoved deep into his pockets, hair slightly messy like he hadn't slept. Ryan, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. What are you doing here? He shrugged, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd stop by. His excuse was weak, and we both knew it. Ryan didn't live anywhere near my neighborhood. I closed the door behind him, my stomach twisting in knots. Is something wrong? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He sat down on the couch, elbows resting on his knees. There was a heaviness in the air, an unspoken tension that made it hard to breathe. About yesterday, he started, eyes locked on the floor. I quickly cut him off. Let's not make it weird, okay? It was nothing. But he shook his head, finally looking up. It wasn't nothing. I meant what I said, Rachel. The way he said my name sent a chill down my spine. He never called me that, always Aunt Rachel. But this time was different, and it felt like a line had been crossed. Ryan, stop, I said, but my voice came out softer than I intended. I can't, he replied, standing up and closing the distance between us. I took a step back, but he kept his eyes on me. I know this is wrong. Believe me, I've told myself that 100 times. But I can't stop thinking about you. About yesterday. About how you looked. How you made me feel. My breath caught, and I shook my head. You're confused. This isn't real, it can't be. But it is, he said, his voice low and desperate. He reached out, gently brushing his fingers against mine. I should have pulled away, but I didn't. Instead, I felt my pulse quicken, heat rising in my cheeks as his touch lingered just a moment too long. Ryan, this has to stop, I whispered, my voice trembling. He stepped closer, and suddenly I was aware of how small the room felt, how close we were. Tell me you don't feel it too, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but no words came out. Instead, the silence hung between us, heavy and suffocating. He leaned in slightly, and for a terrifying moment, I thought he might actually try to kiss me. That's when I finally found my voice. Stop, I said, stepping back and putting space between us. He froze, his expression torn between regret and longing. I'm sorry, he said quickly. I didn't mean to, I held up a hand to silence him. You need to go. Now. His face fell, but he nodded, stepping toward the door. Before he left, he turned to look at me one last time. I meant what I said, he murmured. I'll stop if you want me to. But if you feel even a little bit of what I feel, just say the word. And then he was gone, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding and my thoughts in chaos. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words kept replaying in my head. The way he looked at me. The way his touch had lingered. It was wrong. I knew that. But the worst part? A small part of me didn't want it to stop. I didn't hear from Ryan for 3 days after he left my house. 3 long days where I replayed every word, every look, and every touch in my mind. I told myself the space was good, that it was exactly what we needed to clear our heads. But instead of clarity, all I felt was confusion. The worst part was that I missed him. That realization hit me harder than anything else. It wasn't just guilt or embarrassment anymore. It was longing, an ache that made me question everything I thought I knew about myself. Then on the 4th night, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Ryan. I can't stop thinking about you. Can I see you? I stared at the message, my hands trembling. I knew what the right thing to do was, to ignore it, to shut this down for good. But my fingers moved on their own, typing out a response before I could stop myself. Come by tomorrow. We need to talk. The next day felt like a blur. I couldn't focus on anything. Every tick of the clock felt louder, heavier, as if it was counting down to something inevitable. By the time Ryan knocked on my door that evening, my heart was already racing. I opened the door, and there he was, standing in the dim light of the porch, his expression unreadable. Come in, I said quietly, stepping aside. He walked past me, and I shut the door, suddenly hyper-aware of how alone we were. "Rachel," he said, turning to face me. I held up a hand to stop him. Don't say my name like that." "Like what?" he asked, stepping closer. "Like it means something more than it should," I replied, my voice trembling. He reached out, gently brushing his fingers against my arm. "But it does," he said softly. "You know it does." I pulled away, but the distance between us only seemed to make the tension worse. "This has to stop, Ryan," I said. "We can't." "Why not?" he interrupted, his voice raw and desperate. "Because it's wrong. Because people would judge us? What if it's real, Rachel? What if this is something we're meant to feel?" I shook my head, backing away until I hit the edge of the couch. "This isn't real," I said, but the words felt hollow. He stepped closer, and suddenly I was trapped, his presence overwhelming, his eyes searching mine for something I couldn't give him. "Tell me you don't feel it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I opened my mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he reached out and cupped my face, his touch so gentle it made my breath hitch. "Tell me," he said again. And that's when it happened. He kissed me. It was soft at first, hesitant, like he was waiting for me to stop him. But I didn't. Instead, I melted into it, my body betraying everything my mind was screaming. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathless. "This is wrong," I whispered, but even as I said it, I didn't move away. "I don't care," he replied, his voice steady. "Do you?" I didn't answer. Instead, I let him kiss me again. What happened after that felt like a blur, rushed and reckless, a collision of emotions and desires that neither of us could control. But as the night faded and reality set in, so did the guilt. I lay awake long after Ryan had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling and wondering how I'd let it come to this. I thought it was over. I thought I could move past it, bury it deep, and pretend it never happened. But then the texts started. At first, they seemed harmless, short messages that could have come from anyone. But as the days went by, they became more specific. "I saw you too. Does he know what you are?" I didn't recognize the number, but the words sent a chill down my spine. Whoever it was knew. I tried to ignore it, but the messages kept coming, each one more threatening than the last. "You can't hide this forever." I finally broke down and showed Ryan. He was furious, pacing the living room as he read through the texts. "Who the hell could this be?" he demanded. "I don't know," I whispered. "But we need to stop this, Ryan. We need to end it before it gets worse." But Ryan wasn't listening. "No," he said, his jaw tightening. "We're not running from this. We're not running from each other." I wanted to believe him, but the fear in my chest wouldn't go away. And then came the note. It was slipped under my door late one night. "I'm watching." I felt my knees give out as I sank to the floor, clutching the paper in trembling hands. Ryan tried to calm me down, but I could see the fear in his eyes too. "This is getting out of control," I said. "We need to go to the police." But Ryan shook his head. "Not yet. Let me handle this." I wanted to believe he could fix it, that he could make it all go away. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up to an empty bed. Ryan was gone. Panic shot through me as I checked my phone, hoping for a message, but there was nothing. No missed calls, no texts, just silence. I told myself he'd probably just gone for a walk or needed space to clear his head, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The note from the night before flashed in my mind. "I'm watching." Whoever had sent it wasn't bluffing. I spent the next hour pacing the living room, replaying every moment over and over again. Was it someone we knew? Had someone followed us? Or worse, had Ryan told someone? By the time the doorbell rang, my nerves were already frayed. I flung the door open, half expecting Ryan, but instead, I found a man in a dark jacket holding an envelope. "Delivery for Rachel," he said, his voice flat. I hesitated before taking it. "Who sent this?" He shrugged. "Didn't say." My hands trembled as I shut the door and tore open the envelope. Inside was a single photo. It was me and Ryan, taken through the living room window. I was sitting on the couch, and he was leaning toward me, his hand resting on my knee. The caption scrawled across the bottom made my stomach drop. "I know everything." I staggered back, my breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. Ryan's name flashed across my phone, just as I was about to collapse. "Where are you?" I demanded the moment I picked up. "I'm on my way back," he said, his voice tight. "Stay inside and lock the doors." "Ryan, someone took a picture of us," I said, barely able to keep my voice steady. "They're watching." "Don't panic," he said quickly. "I'll handle it." But I was panicking. How could I not? When Ryan finally arrived, His jaw tightened as he stared at the photo. "We need to end this," I said, my voice breaking. He nodded but didn't say anything. Instead, he pulled me into his arms, and for a moment, I let myself believe that everything would be okay. But things only got worse. The messages kept coming. "You think this is a game? Everyone's going to know what you did." It was relentless, and no matter how hard we tried to ignore it, the fear grew. I started looking over my shoulder everywhere I went, jumping at every shadow and unfamiliar face. I stopped answering the phone unless I recognized the number. Ryan became my only source of comfort, but even that was complicated. The guilt was suffocating. We tried to keep our distance, to remind ourselves that this wasn't right, but the stress only pulled us closer. Late one night, after yet another threatening message, Ryan snapped. "I can't take this anymore," he said, pacing the room. "We have to tell someone." "Who?" I demanded. "The police? What are we going to say? That we crossed a line and now someone's blackmailing us?" He stopped, looking at me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "I don't care what happens to me, Rachel. I just need to protect you." Tears burned my eyes, and before I knew it, I was in his arms again. "This is my fault," I whispered. "No," he said firmly. "This is our mess, and we'll get through it. Together." But as much as I wanted to believe him, the weight of what we'd done felt unbearable. We weren't just hiding a mistake. We were hiding a betrayal. The breaking point came 2 nights later. Ryan was asleep on the couch when my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a message. It was a video. With shaking hands, I pressed play. The footage was dark, grainy, but unmistakable. It was me and Ryan, kissing, touching, completely exposed. And the caption beneath it made my blood run cold. "One click and everyone sees this." I dropped the phone, my vision blurring. Ryan woke up immediately, rushing to my side. "What is it? What happened?" I couldn't speak. Instead, I just pointed at the phone. His expression darkened as he picked it up, watching the video in silence. When it ended, he set the phone down and turned to me. "This ends now," he said, his voice hard. "Ryan, what are you going to do?" But he didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed his jacket and stormed out the door. I wanted to stop him, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, paralyzed by the fear of what would happen next. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, staring out into the darkness, waiting for Ryan to come back. But as the hours dragged on, the fear turned into something even worse. Dread. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't going to end well. Ryan didn't come back that night. I sat by the window until the first light of dawn, my stomach in knots as I stared at my phone, willing it to ring. It didn't. By morning, panic set in. I called him over and over, but each call went straight to voicemail. I tried to convince myself he just needed time, that he'd come back once he cooled off. But hours turned into a day, and then another. On the 3rd day, I got the call. It wasn't from Ryan. "This is Officer Daniels. Is this Rachel Matthews?" My breath caught. "Yes. We need you to come down to the station." The next few hours were a blur. Ryan had been arrested after confronting someone, a man he claimed was responsible for the threats. He'd lost control, and now he was facing assault charges. When I saw him through the glass in the visitation room, my heart shattered. He looked exhausted, broken, but his eyes still searched mine the same way they always had. "I did it for you," he said quietly. "Ryan," I whispered, tears spilling over. "This has to stop." "I can't lose you," he said, his voice trembling. "You're not losing me," I said. "But this isn't love, it's chaos. We're destroying ourselves." He dropped his head, and for the first time, I saw the weight of what we'd done finally hit him. The fallout wasn't just about us anymore. It was about the people we'd hurt, the trust we'd broken. And no matter how much we cared about each other, we couldn't erase the damage. By the time I left the station, I knew what I had to do. I cut ties with Ryan completely. It wasn't easy. The texts and calls didn't stop immediately, but eventually he let go. And so did I. I spent months rebuilding, trying to forgive myself for crossing lines I never thought I'd cross. I went to therapy, surrounded myself with friends, and forced myself to face the truth. Love doesn't justify destruction. What felt passionate and real in the moment had come at a cost too high to bear. And Ryan? I heard he moved out of town after his probation ended. I didn't reach out. I couldn't. But sometimes late at night, I still think about him, the way he looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered. And I remind myself that love should never make you feel like you're drowning. It should lift you up, not pull you under. What would you have done if you were in Rachel's position? Could you have walked away sooner? Or would the temptation have been too strong? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'm dying to hear what you think. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more shocking and emotional stories like this one. Trust me, the next one will leave you speechless.